I'm James Dixon. I'm a practicing San Francisco architect, and today we're going to take an architectural walking tour of San Francisco. The iconic building over my left shoulder is the very famous Transamerica Pyramid, completed in 1972, designed by William Pereira and Associates. You know you've arrived in San Francisco when you see the Transamerica Pyramid. One of the reasons, it's raison d'etre for its shape, which is you can see all the way through to downtown. And that was an important distinction that the person who commissioned the building, who was the CEO of Transamerica Corporation, said, I want more light onto the street. And the city said, we want more vantage points to downtown. So that shape reconciles those two desires to a remarkable degree. And you'll see at either side of the pyramid shape, there are two concrete shafts. One is the elevator core, the other is a stairway shaft with the smoke shaft. That's the reason for those. But they work very well with the pyramid shape. The building terminates the long axis of Columbus. Columbus goes all the way from Fisherman's Wharf through North Beach, the Italian area, through Chinatown, into the financial district. As an architectural quibble, the way the building meets the sky was given much more attention than the way the building meets the street. You'll see how they had to resolve the inclined face of the building with windows that don't want to be inclined. No one wants to feel like the building's falling on them. So the way they resolved that was with a series of concrete forms, and the window frames are offset from one another with the one above it, so that when the building horizontally meets the inclined edge, that isn't ever a sliver. It's always a full window. Both the Transamerica Pyramid and the B of A, a former B of A World Headquarters building, are in the valleys. So this is what led to the fear of, we're going to have these tall things at the bottom of valleys. It just creates this homogeneity of viewpoint. Now we're standing in front of the Hallidie building, completed in 1917 by the architect Willis Polk. The building is named for Andrew Hallidie, who is the inventor of the cable car system here in San Francisco. So he was a mining engineer who was brought over from Scotland to say, how do we get the ore out of the mines? So he developed these very Harry Potter-esque carts on rails. That same idea was then used for the cable car system that is now a National Registered Historic Landmark. What you'll notice is that the facade is entirely glass. There is a metal armature that supports the glass, and then the metal armature goes back to be attached to the structural skeleton. This is seen as a radical departure from what was going on in architecture at the time. The idea of the glass curtain wall is what's on display here. What Polk is doing is allowing as much natural light into the space as possible. This idea of the glass curtain wall turns on its head the famous architectural dictum, window versus wall, and says, window is wall. In the same way that Frank Lloyd Wright said, no, it's not form follows function, form is function. So the idea of that curtain of glass suspended over a public sidewalk on an armature you're just kind of inventing was so gutsy. This had been done in Germany before by Walter Gropius, but this is again the first or the second time in America this had been done. But the idea of the Mad Men era, when everything was a glass-clad skyscraper, is exactly the progeny of this idea. Welcome to the incredibly beautiful Pacific Telephone and Telegraph building. This is the first modern skyscraper in San Francisco. This was done in 1925. So the way the building meets the street is with an elbow-high level of Sierra Nevada granite, and above that is terracotta. This is a steel frame building. I have to have it fireproofed. So the way you do that, or the way they did it, was with terracotta around the steel skeleton. And the terracotta does a very good job of matching the original Sierra Nevada granite. If you look at just above the entryway, there is the beautiful bell system bell. And then even at each of the spandrel panels at the lower floor, there's a series of bells that hang down post-World War I. The idea of this new world view, this new architecture, was a rejection of any type of a European past. Europe had nearly destroyed the entire world. Pfluger loved the idea of the Mayan world and the Chinese world as the major influences of San Francisco architecture. This building behind me is 555 California, formerly the world headquarters of the Bank of America building. By using crystalline forms in each of the bays, it achieves this geometric purity going from the street to the sky. And the geometric purity is maintained uninterrupted until each of those individual bays end at varying heights on the facade. Then there is a unified crown that is very clearly faceted at each side as it wraps and forms the top or the hat to the building. And this building is one of the two that were seen as the start of the Manhattanization of San Francisco. As much as this building is loved, it also was feared as making these canyons downtown like Manhattan. So this talks a lot about the history of the era and how we are housing modern corporate America in these monuments to capitalism. Now we're at the top of Telegraph Hill, at the base of the very famous Coit Tower. This tower was completed in 1933 and was the result of a design competition. It actually exceeded the height ordinance of the time, but because it was so beautiful, the Board of Supervisors, they also said, you know what, we're going to pass a new zoning law so no one can build anything tall near this building. From this vantage point, from the base of Coit Tower, you can see the entire panorama of San Francisco. The way this building meets the sky with this filigree of architectural bravado, the building itself can be seen as an abstracted fire nozzle. The designer said that's not the case at all. It is simply its own idea. The building meets the ground with a beautiful colonnade and a promenade around its entire base. Housed within that base are controversial murals, controversial when they were done and controversial today. It was done as part of the Depression era Works Progress Association. There was a hammer and sickle in one of the murals, and it was seen as so controversial, at odds with American values, that they padlocked the building and had them paint over the hammer and sickle. Then, once it was painted over, then they took the padlock off. But still in those murals, still seen, are people in the murals reaching for Das Kapital in the library, browsing the workers' daily magazines in the magazine racks. It is a very stark social difference between what was happening in the Depression era with what was happening when the murals were done. Behind me is the very famous Postcard Row. These were all built in 1894 and 1895 by the multi-hyphenate Kavanaugh, who was described as a carpenter, designer, builder, developer. You pick the noun. So all these are Queen Anne in style. The defining characteristic of Queen Anne is the roof form goes all the way through from front to back. You don't have the false fronts that you would have in Italianate or in stick style. The roof form is telling the truth about how the building was framed. Previously, in the previous styles, one was constrained by the balloon framing system that went all the way from the foundation all the way up to the top of the roof. Now, with a new framing system called platform framing or Western framing, each floor was framed individually so that each floor could do its own thing. So every cubic inch of Queen Anne's was usable. I feel my Van Helsing duty and quest to drive a stake through the myth of Painted Lady. That was only a thing starting in the late 60s, right down here on Steiner Street. No one wanted bright pink on the exterior of their building, nor did they want that mixed with a lime green. Guess who did? Hippies were fine with that. That was the cheapest possible paint. Those were the cheapest buildings to rent. And the hippies said, no, we're fine with low rents, and we're gonna paint them the way our psychedelic dreams are. Behind me is the gorgeous block of 3200 Pacific Avenue, known as the Wall. The reason the Wall is so important, it was the most prestigious address one could have. The Wall is simply a masonry wall that separates the historic Presidio, where the Spanish originally established their fort in 1776, from public land. These houses on this block had the premier architects of this era working at the height of their powers with barely any limited budget. But here is what was limiting. These lots are ridiculously small. The Wall comes at a trapezoid to the rectilinear street grid, to the point that at the very bottom of this block, the lot is only 14 feet wide. Then it comes to a point. So that's a tough architectural challenge to meet. They were up for the challenge. The building immediately right here is 3232 Pacific, done by the God Almighty Ernest Coxhead in 1902. This building is an example of first Bay Area style, if not the best example of first Bay Area style, which combines the informality of East Coast shingle style. Shingle style was brought into being by H.H. Richardson and architects of his ilk, again, architects at the top of their game, designing residences for the elite New York City socialites who got tired of the fussiness and the formality of living downtown New York City. So they would design these homes based on American colonial shingle architecture, a rustic architecture. These buildings carry through that informality with a uniform wrapping of shingles on every surface, including the roofs. And this gets into the idea of skin buildings. Is once you have a skin, anything that happens in it can be very irregular. You can do irregular window sizes. I can have a casement next to a double hung. I can have a bay window next to an oriel window. Who cares? At the stairway above is a Palladian window. Below that is a broken cornice over the front door. Those elements are usually only found in classical architecture, the broken cornice. Down the block, great examples of Second Bay Area style. What's Second Bay Area style? Second Bay Area style uses the vernacular architecture of California. So what Second Bay Area style does is say everything is going to be horizontally based, using simple materials, natural and exposed to view, as large panes of glass as we can possibly manage, and very simply constructed buildings. So they were very carpenter friendly. Everything was a very carpenter friendly right angle, but very Californian in the sense that I can walk right out onto the patio. I can have an interior courtyard. But everything is horizontally based as if it were in some theoretical farmyard. The difference to Third Bay Area style is Third Bay Area style is vertical. It's saying, I am in San Francisco. I am in a city. I have hard limits where my property lines are. So Third Bay Area style, very vertical. Second Bay Area style, very horizontal. First Bay Area style, drop dead gorgeous. This block, going up, going down, going across, every building is chock full of excellent architects doing excellent work. We're here to see two iconic things. One is the San Francisco fog in summer. The second is the very famous Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge was completed in 1937. It was done by two main engineers. The chief engineer was Strauss, and the principal engineer was Ellis. Ellis has been given most of the credit for the bridge's design. Their architect who pulled everything together, including the color, was Irving Morrow. Irving Morrow kept a very Art Deco feel for this bridge, going from the largest elements to the smallest. The largest elements being these immensely tall steel towers that have an inset and repeated parallel faceting that works all the way up and goes to the sky and then is divided 3 times as it marches down. The main thing about the bridge is this incredibly graceful and beautiful 4,200 foot span. The bridge meets the land with concrete abutments to weight the lines down as they go into the earth. The reason that's important is it is a suspension bridge, and it wants to pull those suspension cables right out of the land. But they're anchored into the hillsides on both sides. What Morrow does with the concrete abutments is to give them the same faceting that he used at the towers and elsewhere in the design. Because Art Deco is an unabashedly vertical style, it uses geometric ornament as its cornerstone and as a linking device. So the guardrails are a series of verticals. The reason that's important is just like stroboscopic movies, just like zoetrope movies, your eye quickly removes the vertical and you see what's behind it. The Navy wanted the bridge painted in a striped pattern because of danger to shipping. And Morrow said, we're not doing that. He said, we're using this color I'm gonna call International Orange. So the Golden Gate Bridge is not named for the color International Orange. It is named for the Golden Gate Strait that it bridges.